Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining our open webinar today. This webinar is hosted by the MITx MicroMasters Program in Supply Chain Management. I'm Eva Ponce. I'm the Director of Online Education at MIT, the Center for Transportation and Logistics, and the founder of the MIT Omnichannel Supply Chain Lab. Let me start this webinar with a question. So, what does supply chain analytics look like in the real world, in companies like UPS at global scale? And more importantly, how can we turn analytics, technology, and artificial intelligence into action just to help companies to drive better operational and strategic decisions at that scale? Today, we are honored to explore these questions with Vandana Ramani. Vandana is the Vice President of Strategy and Digital Business Transformation at UPS. Welcome, Vandana. I'm truly excited to host you today.
Thank you, Eva. Thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Excellent. So in this session, we are going to discuss how UPS leverages analytics, technology, and AI to manage complexity, to trying to improve on-time delivery, and also to enhance customer satisfaction. But before we begin with our discussion with Vandana, let's try to launch a fun poll to better understand our audience. So we really want to learn more about you and your interest to be here today. Let's see if you join today because you want to learn more about a global and complex company like UPS. Maybe it's because you want to learn more about our amazing speaker today, Vandana Ramani, or because you are taking the courses with us, the MicroMasters Program in Supply Chain Management, and you want to connect what you are learning in these courses with the reality and what companies are doing in this space. So let us know why you are here today. While you are responding to the poll, let me briefly go through the agenda and the plan for this webinar. So we are going to start learning first about Vandana's leadership journey and her current role at UPS. Then we are going to explore how analytics, technology, and AI support real operational decisions at scale. We are going to discuss about network planning to customer performance. And then, and most importantly, we are also going to discuss what capabilities supply chain professionals need to develop to lead these transformations at scale. So please feel free to share your questions through the Q&A feature. We want to make this webinar interactive, so be sure that you log in with your name, and we will also launch some polls through the webinar and the conversations we are going to plan to have today with Vandana. Let's try to have a look to the results of our first poll. Let's see. Okay, so most of 30% of the audience, Vandana, are here to learn how UPS uses analytics, technology, and AI. I think they are in the right webinar then. We have about 30% also that really want to learn from you, Vandana, from your leadership style, from your role, from your challenges, from the things that maybe are you awake at night thinking about how to solve every day. What else? We have about 15% that want to connect what they learn in the courses with what we are going to discuss. That's great. So with that context, let's try to dive into the conversation. And first of all, let me formally introduce our industry speaker. So Vandana Ramani is the Vice President of Strategy and Digital Business Transformation at UPS. She's currently leading the transformation of the sales and commercial function at UPS, leveraging technology, advanced analytics, AI, and most importantly, people to drive this impact at scale. Vandana brings more than 25 years of experience, split between top-tier consulting companies like KPMG and Deloitte, and also leading roles in industry. And regarding the industry, her experience spans to multiple different industries for transportation and logistics, retail, telecommunications, banking, insurance, and financial services. So this gives to Vandana a truly cross-sector perspective on transformation. She has also experience in different countries and different continents. She has been working in the United States, in Asia Pacific, and Europe. And beyond this impressive professional journey, Vandana is also a lifelong learner. This is something I really want to highlight because definitely someone who has consistently stepped into new geographies, into new industries, and discomfort zones to grow as a leader. So with that, Vandana, welcome again. We are truly honored to have you with us today.
Thank you, Eva. I'm very grateful. Very grateful. Thank you.
Excellent. So, Vandana, you lead global strategic initiatives at one company that is one of the most complex logistics networks in the world. Could you start sharing with us more about your journey to be here?
Sure, sure. And again, thank you to the team here that's put this together because it takes a village to put programs like this. I appreciate all the organization here. So from my journey perspective, oh gosh, it's like I said, 25, so probably 26 years plus now, if you will. So I've worked in India, then actually went to Africa, and then came to the US, but worked in Asia Pacific, Europe with a bunch of clients. And I call it as a split between consulting and industry. And I had some conscious choices as I made it. When I did the choice from industry to consulting and consulting to back to industry, they were very conscious choices. And I have no regrets because I think it really gave me a well-rounded perspective. I think the way I look at it is I think you can't consult well if you don't have hands-on experience. And if you don't have hands-on experience and you don't understand strategy and you don't understand the big picture, that becomes a bit much. So I think I've really enjoyed in my career, we've been able to do both. So that's been great. Obviously, working with the three continents, culturally, they're very different. So supply chains are different, negotiation and influencing skills are different in different countries. Culture is very local. So I had to learn and relearn that, which I really enjoyed. I really enjoyed because it pushed my brain to think differently in every continent, if you will. Math is universal. So numbers is universal. It's a universal language. So at least if it's something you want to bond over, it would probably be how people look at their balance sheets and their P&Ls. And obviously, when you think about supply chains, I think various factors come into play in different countries, right? Continents. So not that I've been in the supply chain side only, I've actually done work with, Absa Barclays, for example, in Africa. In India, I've worked with Vodafone because when they were a telecom company, very large telecom company, they were undergoing a very large scale transformation. I was working with them. So really got the opportunity in consulting to work with different industries. And I personally really enjoy that because I probably think being in the discomfort zone is my specialty. It's my superpower. I don't get fazed by it. I really enjoy it because I think it makes sure that my mind stays humble for learning. Like I make sure I show up in a way that I'm always a student. So, and I enjoy it. I have no qualms with being a beginner in my journey, even today. Yeah. So probably that's like in a nutshell, but I'd love to talk more. But my journey is like it's a story by itself between the three continents.
Yeah, of course. And you mentioned this, the cross-industry experience that definitely you are learning from different practices in different type of industries, but also the three-continent experience. Is also to kind of start from scratch every single time, correct? And you need to build your network. You need to know your new clients in a culture that probably is very different than the culture in a different country. So what does this taught you? I guess many lessons learned, but some of these key lessons learned from this from leadership and transformation and how to implement this kind of transformation in these different geographies.
Yeah. So Honestly, it was super challenging, I have to say, because when I was in India, I was selling as well as delivering and consulting. So India has a different set of dynamics on how you negotiate, how you sell, what value means. And there are various stages to a selling process. So obviously I come with a lot of I acutely listen. That's one trait, to just read between the lines when you're selling to people, etc. And then Africa had its own set of challenges. And I say challenges, but I like to use the word opportunity because it obviously gets you to think about, negotiation, about dealing with people differently. But here's what's fascinating about when you work with different countries, and I often reflect on it because I do get a chance to do it now, having been in 3 continents, is I think people look at leadership as very static. I go read a book, I apply 7 principles, and I'm going to learn leadership. Whereas it is not. It's very dynamic and it's very personal. So I feel like somewhere the ability to stay dynamic and tailor it to the teams you lead, because teams, their form and shape changes, their context changes, their needs change. So you almost have to always acutely be aware of what your team construct is, what they get motivated by. By the way, every culture is different. So, even culturally, how you see how India gets motivated versus how, you'll see just little nuances of how people get motivated at work is very different in each country. And so you've got to make sure you're staying personal. The second thing I would say is leadership per se has context. Cultural context matters, and on how decisions are taken and how work gets done. So cultural context is really important, and that plays a role when decisions are being taken. And I think the third is courage, and it comes to mind heavily. And especially now, since I have the opportunity to work for such a wonderful company at UPS, if you will, because here, you could stay at a beginner mindset and learn at the bottommost stage, because there's just so much to learn with such a history of this organization. But if I think about what I've really begun to appreciate is leaders have to show courage, because sometimes the decisions they take may not make everybody happy. It makes some stakeholders happy and may not make the others. And these are hard decisions. It is very easy to be on the sidelines, and it's very easy to put a comment in social media and say, hey, I'm not sure why you took this decision. It doesn't seem right. But I think the tricky piece is to actually be in the arena and take the decision. So I really respect the amount of courage leaders show. I've learned that over time. And I continue to say leadership needs to be listening and being curious. Whereas for transformation, I feel when you ask me the question on transformation, I feel transformation is a bit like, I feel you have real numbers and outcomes. Like all organizations go through transformation. You'll have financial targets, and they'll say, hey, you got to do a cost takeout, or you got to overhaul the business, or you got to go after new business. If you will, it's an acquisition. There are real numbers and outcomes. But I think the bigger challenge in transformation is taking people along. And not everyone comes along the same way. That is the key, right? Everyone's motivated differently. Everyone comes along differently. And I think I'll just make one last comment on transformation, because it's my pet space, if you will. It's like I've spent so many years in transformation. I think the big difference I'm seeing now in transformation is technology is embedded every step of the way. There is no ignoring it. If there's someone who's thinking, hey, I can do transformation without technology, I mean, that doesn't exist anymore. I feel like every conversation has technology embedded in it, which is super exciting in my viewpoint. I know it's a long answer, Eva, but I hope it helped.
No, it's a perfect answer, and also took very different key points. No, how to motivate people in different cultures. That definitely the way to the incentives and the way that people are motivated is very different, and then how to manage this impact many stakeholders with the decision, as you mentioned. So we will come back to the lifelong learning later, because definitely you also define yourself as a continuous student. You are continuous learning and listening. That is, I think, some of the key skills for a leader, for sure. But let's move now more to your role at UPS. So today, as the VP of Strategy and Digital Transformation, you are leading this transformation, focusing on sales and commercial functions mainly at this moment. But as you mentioned, you are leveraging digital, you are leveraging technology, you are leveraging AI capabilities. So can you help us understand the scope of your role? What really digital transformation means in practical terms at UPS?
Yeah, sure. So from my role perspective, currently I'm on special assignment and I'm looking at transforming sales and commercial holistically, if you will. And there are two goals. Primarily, we say efficiency and effectiveness. And one could say, hey, these terms have been used or overused, if you will, but you've got to see it to believe it when you're in the weeds, especially in a supply chain company like ours, to look at how selling takes place. And, partially it's my journey has been to again be in the weeds with the salespeople to understand what does it take to grow customers or grow accounts versus what does it take to retain our customers, because there's a lot of book of business, like you almost think of it's been years of relationships between our customers and us that we've got to continue to retain, but you can't take for granted, right? So how do you now and we've got these stages of, we call it the jobs to be done or the customer experience, if you will, from the time they want to engage with us as a brand, like they almost think of it as they go on ups.com to buy our services, to the time when I would say retain and cultivate, if you will. That how do we engage and how could be more efficient and effective? The reason is this, very simple. Let's just take like some, if I just think about, I don't know if any of you came across the Gartner study where they said, almost 61% of B2B buying, they prefer not having a representative, a sales rep. So if you just think about buying experience for the B2B world, 61% don't prefer to talk to someone, right? So now you're saying, which means all my interactions have to be digital or digitized. And they're saying, hey, I will buy, I will explore, I will court, before we get into a contract, all digitally. And by the way, once you're in the contract, stay as non-invasive as possible. And I call our industry, sometimes you've got to stay non-invasive, because if everything is working, it's actually we're doing really well. That's what UPS would like to think in terms of our customer relationships. So I think my role is that right now, the work I do. And by the way, I typically try and, again, going with the theme of being outside my comfort zone, I typically try and rotate my roles, by the way, as a policy personally, every 12 to 16 months, because it helps me stay engaged and deliver well. But if you then think about that, digital transformation therefore means, I would say, bringing technology and business together to deliver shared outcomes and goals. And I put it in the most simplest of fashions, but I can tell you in organizations as large as us, it is not easy, because you've got to get cross-functional teams, very complex, very hairy functions, which have been overlaid over industry. And I do have to talk about this a little bit because this context is important, is we are a delivery organization, UPS, right? If you're just about saying, I deliver packages from point A to point B. But the interesting piece is we're servicing all of that, right? If things go wrong, there's a damage, there's a claim, billing went wrong, and it could be multiple packages for a customer that we're working through with, really extensive invoices, rates looking different, rates changing, trade policies, tariffs being applied, all of it. Imagine applying that over the supply chain of multiple industries, which is what makes UPS complex. Because now you think about it, I have wine shipping. That looks different from shipping a pet. That looks different from shipping hazmat goods versus regulated goods. So we have a lot of complexity. So digital transformation, when you say I have to bring tech and business together for shared outcomes and goals, gets to be very gnarly for organizations like ours.
Excellent. So you bring this intersection between tech and business that is not always obvious at all, is really a challenge. And also the complexity of working with multiple industries, that in your case is kind of almost our industries. You are serving most of the industries that exist. So how and UPS operates at this global network, global complex logistic network. What are the guiding principles that shape your global strategy? Because I believe that these guiding principles are the things that might help to work also in the different industries and have kind of a, let's say, a common language or something similar in order to manage that.
Yeah. I'm a big believer in principles. It's funny, I use that word often in my work as well, saying you got to have, even for your day-to-day projects, I mean, I have this audience here before me, I would say, have guiding principles. They're almost like I call it them, they're like a value system for yourself, right? Almost say, that's how I would run my program or my initiative. So I actually encourage principles as a really important method to work. For UPS, and Carol Tomei, our CEO, has mentioned this in several earnings calls as well. If you will, we've had three key principles: customer first, people led, innovation driven. And what that means is essentially think of it as, from a customer first, how frictionless can you be, reliable, personalized? Because today everyone's looking for unique, at a person level experience, tracking packages, tools like My Choice that we have, consistent service across channels, whether I call, whether I email, whether I go on the website, consistent experience. People-led is almost like, think of employees being the backbone of our operations, right? Everything that we do, empowering employees to bring ideas to the forefront as we experience change. Because here's the reality of, day to day what's happening in our network, that intelligence and feedback drives our solutions. It has to feed back into and drive the solution. So training is important. We also have a lot of encouragement on new and relevant skills in the organization, including where we're going with AI, if you will. And then innovation driven feels very obvious, but I almost think it's everything from world-class technology. And, it's surprising you hear so much of AI in this world right now. And I've been having a lot of conversations with our tech teams, and they often tell me, and especially the folks who've worked in UPS for 30 years plus, and they'll say, AI seems to be a new terminology, but at UPS, this has been in existence forever. Because if you think about our optimization systems, dispatch optimization, route optimization, all of those. So I think innovation is almost embedded in everything we do. But I think the bigger thing is the goal is smart growth, long-term value over just pure scale, right? And we've always had that, we call it the better, not bigger strategy. So all of these principles guide us in that direction.
That's great to have this clarity about what are the principles, what is guiding the company. Most importantly, how do you see these principles kind of translating into action? I mean, is this part of every single project? When you launch a new project, are these principles part of that project? How do you translate the principles into action?
Yeah. So actually, we have a pretty robust mechanisms around the organizations as part of our strategy planning and enablement functions, if you will, where you basically look at all of the projects. And, this is a proactive question when you're reviewing projects, right? So on customer first, it's a bit like the conversations change. By the way, you could have those three principles, but the nature of the conversations could change. So if you think about in customer first right now, our conversations are moving towards last couple of years has been moved from reactive to proactive. How can you predict? How can you predict customer behavior like a little bit more so that your what if scenarios have options and outcomes and then you could choose from it? The people-led, I almost think aspects of, and again, I'm trying to see if to answer your question where you're saying, hey, how does it translate? We look at, people-led saying if that is the principle, even if it's a customer first initiative, does it have a people-led aspect to it? So now here's a great example. If I take, and people tend to say customer first means I probably think sales and marketing is the only function thinking of it. That's not true, right? I would think intuitively, for example, our tendency for people-led is to say, oh, that's an HR problem. They'll probably be thinking of fatigue, injury in the workplace, or probably compensation and, your performance appraisal. But people-led is far more than that. It's simple things like if I take the customer lifecycle, you're now saying, what does a salesperson intuitively need when they're on the road visiting a customer? How can AI help a salesperson when they're walking into a customer warehouse? So now you're thinking from the persona of a salesperson who's delivering their job, and you're then translating to say, what are the initiatives that can support that? Because then you're being very people-led in your approach of driving a certain experience for sales who become our front brand for meeting up with the customers, if you will. So that's like just some examples.
No, but these examples are really helpful to better understand how you implement and bring these guiding principles into action. And now let's deep dive more on challenges. I know your approach is always opportunities, so we can talk about opportunities, but let's talk more about, because truly operating global supply chains currently is just to work under uncertainty. The level of uncertainty is huge. because of geopolitical shifts, demand volatility is another consideration, and especially to companies like yours that are moving more and more into e-commerce, that is also bringing a higher volatility. Labor constraints is another big challenge that companies are facing. So how do you transform this chaos, uncertainty into a structured data-driven plan of action that trying to make an impact at the company level and also to deliver measurable results, performance at the end of the day?
No, it's a great question, actually. It's a great question. So I think somewhere you answered it yourself by asking what are the principles, because they almost come in the way of our ability to measure. But I think like I look at entropy is like the natural state in logistics. Like you always will have a state of chaos and uncertainty, right? And I think, I mean, at least it's my conclusion, it could be my personal statement here, but I feel like you don't always solve chaos with more data, but you solve it with better filters, better foundations, and better principles. So like you can take global volatility, if you will, but filter it through, the core principles. So you then think about strategy, and we do a lot of good work around tying top-end strategy to execution. And I think that's something, because I would say we lead with execution first, because we are that kind of a company, very even culturally rooted in a lot of humility and hard work through the years, which I've really begun to admire, because we always say, give us a good, hairy problem and you put a UPSer behind it, and for sure it'll get solved. Like, for sure it'll get solved, right? And very, very hardworking culture. So when I think of that, connecting strategy to that, which is to say, well, these are cross-functional initiatives, and they all point to the North Star, and you know what the North Star is. And you'll see that in many of our earnings calls, we state it with a lot of clarity. And then you have measurable outcomes to say these projects are either to cost to serve, it's on-time performance, it's ROIC, or it's growth or retention oriented. I have to say it gets tricky when you look at revenue side, because the direct correlation of projects to revenue, it's super tricky because it depends on so many factors. Cost is a lot easier to manage as projects, but we are getting there because you can create correlation models and you can say, hey, this is indicative. You can create a control group and say, this is indicative of that we're heading in the right direction. You can be pretty creative about it, but we're starting to see a lot of that is embedded now in the organization, almost in day-to-day speak, to translate strategy to this. Now, what that means is you have to always be prepared for what-if scenarios, right? Port closure, demand surge, etc. You're always got options laid out so that you have to do a mode shift from air to ground or whatever. You always have those plans ready. And so you're almost saying, I am prepared for seasonality. I'm prepared for this. And you build those permutations and combinations so that what if this happens, you aren't waiting for creating a plan. The plan is already there.
Yeah, so it's very interesting. I love your answer, because you said it's more than data, is how you connect with the principles, how you connect with the foundations. And now I would like to connect with the supply chain analytics. So because for many organizations, collect data is a challenge, but some of them are there, having data is there. Another thing is the quality of data, the accuracy of the data, but let's assume that we have the data. But there are only a fewer companies that are truly able to use analytics to systematically improve decisions under uncertainty. So I'm curious about, I guess that at companies like UPS, this is not kind of an optional thing. It's a foundational thing, just to translate data into analytics, translate data into a dashboard that you can make better decisions. So can you share, Vandana, some specific examples of how supply chain analytics are transforming decisions at UPS? Can be at the network design level, capacity planning, or customer performance.
Sure. I mean, we say truckloads of examples with no pun intended there, but yeah. So I think you have variables, external variables, and continuously we pivot on, which is trade policy shift or weather events, labor strikes. That's like a lot of noise, if you will. And then I also look at things like historical data patterns, so which could be reliable, but may lack foresight. So think of it as I have history, but it may not allow me to predict necessarily. It could, It may not. You got to play with both external, forward-looking as well as historical, if you will. So we try and like work through to say, how do you take the noise data into actionable signals? And we use it in different, functions, if you will, in different ways. So for example, like if you build a new hub, you typically have a very complex linear programming model built, which weighs various variables like labor costs, tax incentives, proximity to air hubs, historical volume patterns and things like that, right? So you'll have that kind of situation. Or if you think about, we've got a service part logistics business, right? So how do you stock critical medical equipment devices? Should you stock it in Singapore or our Louisville hub? And you've got to think about holding costs versus, your guaranteed delivery window, because you would have promised something to the customer. So these are all things that you've got to work through, right? And then you have a lot of what I call in operations, a lot of real-time data that comes through. Sensors, our telematics, a lot of external data feeds. And these all could result in a range of outcomes, like I talked about the what-if scenarios. So you take those multiple variables and determine which risk is worth taking. And that is a hard decision, I have to say, sometimes when you take it by customer, because everything comes at the expense of, and it's a trade-off, and it's never perfect. So if you have a 4-hour delay in the Louisville hub, you'll almost say, what are the downstream effects on our European and Asian air legs? Do you shift modes, like go from air to ground? This is where some bit of, heuristics and stuff comes in, right? Or you take last mile, right? When we do drivers and optimization, multiple things could go wrong. You could have traffic issues, you could have a march, you could have blockages, you could have so many things. But we look at, every day, this is our route optimization software, if you will, that looks at thousands of possible routes, if you will. But the whole thing is you're balancing, saying, I got to minimize inefficiencies. And I suspect most people would have heard about the left turns. Like, we've always talked about the left turns. You take the lesser left turns and you have more efficiency at UPS. And then prioritizing time definite deliveries to shave off miles, right? So those are like almost like ways by which we work through, variables that helps us take decision making. But here's what's interesting. Operations is like a lot of, I would say, physics and constraints. Sales is behavior and probability, right? So that's what makes it fun. I think in sales, you've got things like, predicting churn. How do you proactively have intervention triggers? So I always say this, like, could I get enough signals? And by the way, that's part of my sales transformation work. Could we push more signals to a salesperson to say, hey, we're getting signals that it feels like this customer is going to churn because of X, Y, and Z. The remediation is, I need to probably drop everything I'm doing, meeting other customers, and go and see this customer and retain the relationship, right? That's a very interesting play, if you will, to bring in a little more certainty. Again, I won't say certainty is not a perfection pursuit, it's a progress pursuit. So that's how we do. And then if you take port strikes and everything else, customers are expecting salespeople to know. How do you push that data to salespeople meaningfully? Not like sometimes I feel too much information is an issue. So you got to almost curate it and send it to the salesperson so that it's relevant and intuitive to the role that they're playing. I know I said a lot, but I have plenty of examples.
No, that's great, because you are bringing some of the prescriptive analytics, the linear programming, for example, that is a classic technique that we use in order to just trying to optimize the network, as you mentioned, with the different hubs, with the different nodes. But then you incorporate also the complexity of labor changes, labor costs, the complexity of holding costs that is also changing, or the complexity of having higher tariffs that we didn't have last year and we need to incorporate into the model. So that's great to see how you are using these linear programming models with the appropriate parameters and the appropriate way to model the variability of some of these inputs, in particular to the model. My question now is, because definitely we are observing this, and we are also moving sometimes from more predictive, prescriptive to predictive analytics, just to trying to help to predict somehow this volatility. how have you seen in this analytics area this movement to predictive analytics, maybe with incorporating AI tools to help to bring more contextual information? Have you observed in this trend recently, and how UPS are facing that?
Yeah, I probably think the biggest shift is, like, I think of it as macro optimization to micro optimization, if you will. Like, think of it as individual package or individual experience is the big shift that's taking place. So now, when I say predictive, it's almost real time in a way. And it is a very interesting, bringing together of operational data intelligence with sales data intelligence. And that's where the magic lies, in my view. Because let's just take an example. So if you have a return that you want to do, right, for a product, and by the way, we offer pickups for return, like you can go to somebody's house and pick up the return. Suppose I'm just giving you a very real scenario. You're at home, working remote, and you want to do a return, but for some reason, your manager calls and says, "Hey, I'd love for you to come in the afternoon and finish up this meeting, or we've got to meet somebody important or a customer," and you have to leave home. You have not changed your mind about the return. And UPS driver was supposed to come in and do a pickup. And you now say, "Hey, I don't do the return. You don't pick up my return. I'll drop it at the nearby UPS store." I have just made a real-time decision change as a customer, and the network has to now support that. And it's a great example of how ops and sales data has got to move in tandem to be able to fulfill that, right? And so I think that's starting to show up a lot, which is, it's very curated, it's very nuanced, it's very specific to a package. When I say is like what you expect from, and I think I said this in another interview or podcast, if you will, is the whole thing. We had this incident of a pet iguana that had to be shipped, if you will. I mean, that's such a unique experience to say, I got to finish that in 24 hours. I mean, it's somebody's life is at stake. But how do you then drive that elevated customer experience to create retention, if you will? So a lot of that is shifting, if you will. Predictability, as I said, higher confidence, if you will. Circular economy, that piece is happening a lot. So you're seeing, 30% or more goods are returned. So bidirectional volume, just for a second, think about how complex that could get. I mean, you're sending volume from point A to point B this way. Now you got to think about empty trucks and empty spaces this way, and you got to then optimize. I mean, it's such a wonderful problem statement for anyone who's taking this course and otherwise to think about solving. And then not to forget the credits and refunds. Like, think about the amount of data that will get exchanged between us and retailers for credit refunds. So some of those we're seeing a shift. And then deliver to me, not my house. Like, think about that, like deliver to me as a person. And sustainability is playing a big role. So these are the big, I mean, there are many more, but I would think these are top of mind in my head, if you will.
Yeah, I want to highlight what you mentioned about, for this predictive analytics, the need of the real-time data that is helping with that, and also the deliver to me and the returns. You also mentioned about returns, and I want to connect now with the growth of e-commerce, because definitely the growth of e-commerce is increasing the percentage of return rates in online is much higher. In fashion is 35 to 40% of return rates. So it's huge, a huge challenge for many companies. And it's also bringing delivery challenges, because we know, and you also mentioned the rising customer expectation about receiving the package to me wherever I am, and today, and if possible in less than 2 hours. So this is truly bringing a lot of challenges and complexity to the network and to the supply chain. So Vandana, in order to make this at a scale, how is technology helping UPS to navigate this growing complexity, especially related to the e-commerce challenges, to gain speed, reliability, and doing that through multiple channels? That is one of the key challenges that companies like UPS are facing today.
Yeah, and Eva, here's where the country or the continent also matters. And I have thought of this often. So obviously my roots are in India. So you'll see, I don't know, they have seen supply chain in India because they're completely unreal right now, because of, obviously you have the advantage of having Kirana stores. So they're like mom and pop stores in India where you almost could order and it would they have apps that allow delivery within 10 minutes. So it's not even 2 hours, we're talking about 10 minutes. But here's the deal behind it, right? In India, you could throw labor pools behind it. You can throw people behind it, right? Just to get shorter time frames for delivery. In the US, for example, that challenge is very different. You have a shortage of labor, especially for work such as this, by the way, because people are not are moving away from wanting to choose jobs like this. So then when you start to think about what is that problem statement, what does that trajectory look like, you've got to be very proactively thinking about automating your facilities, and technology plays a big role there, right? Automating facilities. We've got stuff on our small package induction, our loading and unloading systems. We do a lot. We've got RFID that's come, obviously eliminating a lot of the manual scans. It reduces human error, right? It also helps with on-time performance and simple things like it brings in visibility. So, if I bring in visibility for my customers, they can do better inventory management, reduce their carrying costs, if you will. So technology is showing up in, pretty much all areas of our life cycle or our functions, if you will. I mean, I have a whole host of examples on sales, finance, etc., which in UPS, a company like ours, the complexity brings ops, finance, and sales very close together when you sell. Which again makes the industry very unique, because you just can't function without. They're also interconnected because we're servicing, right? Each time you do something, there is a financial implication, and the sales experience gets affected. So they're all very interconnected.
Excellent. So you mentioned the one of the key technologies that is a common thing with many other companies. I would say this end-to-end visibility, these platforms that bring this end-to-end visibility in order to be able to manage this kind of raising customer expectation. Connecting again with the role of AI, which is some of the examples you can share with us about how to incorporate AI-powered tools on top of these analytics, on top of these technologies. For example, the end-to-end visibility. We want to grab that example in particular. What are some of the tools or examples you can share about how AI is augmenting or helping even more to gain this real-time visibility that you need?
Yeah, so I'll touch on examples that I haven't stated before. So I think we talked about automation and hubs and all of that. So just think about the coexistence of, I call it the human beings and robots together, and then how do you drive an optimal network and meet the service levels. But if I think about another great use case for us is cross-border. Like we think about transactions, especially where you've got trade policy changes happening very often. You then have to think about, we are processing almost 90% of those transactions digitally in 2025. That was our record, right? And we leverage AI for that. So it's a lot of I have to then work with making sure the regulation knowledge base stays up to date, and then it starts to impact the way we process the transactions and what is applicable where. Because I've actually been in some sales ride-alongs and I've seen customers almost would specifically ask you a question, say, hey, let me show you this invoice and tell me why the tariffs have been applied in this manner. And it can be so tricky to answer that question. And that's why AI comes in with an AI assistant, if you will, to be able to help salespeople respond to the customer and we process it accurately. Because accuracy is a big piece of some of these financial transactions, because small and medium businesses, it could be a make or break for them from making money, right? If you will. So that, and then I would think all customer care, also another space where you can reduce email resolution time, etc. We're experimenting with a lot there as well.
Excellent. So through this conversation, we have emphasized the role of analytics, the role of technology and AI, but most importantly, you have also emphasized the role of people. And research also shows that automation and AI are not just simply replacing jobs. Most likely, we are creating new roles. We are redesigning existing ones in order to help to have better decision-making overall in the company. So from your perspective, Vandana, how are AI and advanced analytics impacting the workforce inside UPS?
Well, I think I'll speak more generically, UPS or otherwise. I think redefining work is a really good thing. I'm a glass half full person. I'm optimistic about everything that's happening around AI. I think automation of tasks, for example, in our hubs and facilities is putting people into higher order work, because you'd be surprised at how much of insights our people have in their brains. Like think of it sitting here, right? But they have it in their big, and we almost like can now leverage that because their tasks are getting automated, so they're able to take real-time decisions. And that's only possible when you free up the time for people, then they resolve complex errors. It removes a lot of repetitive work. And I also think I feel it's redefining work in a very good way where you're more multi-dimensional when you're doing work. Like I can't be thinking of work from, I'm a salesperson, I have to think of it from a finance point of view, from an operations point of view. So it's redefining work where it's bringing I feel the success of companies where functions are coming together is going to be the key to unlocking the power of AI, in my view. And then lead into what humans do best: empathy, complex problem solving, relationship building, which is where I started.
Yes. Excellent, excellent. Let's try to launch a quick poll, because we have a poll for the audience about which skills they believe are most critical for the future supply chain professional. And while they are filling out that poll, Vandana, you just mentioned the importance of building relationship, change management. What else? What else when you are hiring new people? What are you looking for in terms of key skills now to deal with all of these tools? And more importantly, you made the point, no? It's how to translate all of these powerful tools into the business, into making better decisions. What are these key skills you are looking for?
So, I mean, I look at it as you're like a trilingual professional, if you will, but I feel like you got to almost think of it as I understand business, ROI, strategy, all of that. I understand data and I understand operations. I feel like if you have all of it, you can work through. I mean, tech is unavoidable. Like I almost feel, I keep going back to you just have to be willing to always be curious, bring in multi-dimensional views in your job, in your day-to-day job. And the moment you do that, I think that's an important set of skills. And don't stay comfortable. I mean, I could say that a few times over. And that's what I look for. I think if I summarize it with a very simple statement, I think skill is easy, will is not easy. I think if you have a willing person, I will hire them in my team. Skill is always can be taught.
Yeah. Understand business, data, and operations, the three key things you mentioned. Let's try to share the results of the poll. So almost 64% of our audience vote for technological and AI literacy. That is very aligned with what we just said about understanding tools and operations, analytical skills, also, and adaptability. What we are seeing across industries is that understanding analytical models is no longer optional. It's kind of a key aspect that is not enough just to rely on dashboard or AI outputs. Professionals need to understand how models work, what assumptions they rely on, and this connect with the constraints you were talking at the very beginning of the discussion. We need to incorporate the right constraints and update these constraints, and more importantly, how to have a good sense about how to interpret these results and connect with the business, as you just mentioned. So these are some of the key insights, I would say, in this aspect. So with that, Vandana, which advice do you have for our supply chain professionals that they are looking to learn, they are looking to make progress through this career?
Yeah, so I think I talked about being out of your comfort zone. I mean, I really mean it when I say it. It's if you're feeling like status quo, I've become the master of my area and I know everything, it's time for you to think about what else you should learn about, right? You should always be at the edge of learning, and I'm a big, big believer in that. But I feel like I mean, in a very simple way, think like compass and map. Your map is your technical skill set. So think like this MicroMasters course, linear programming, supply chain physics, like they can get outdated in a volatile world, if you will. That's where your compass comes in, and your compass should be lifelong learning, being empathetic, never stop being a student. I mean, I'm a big believer, never stop being a student.
I love your mindset of being truly a lifelong learner. Thank you. Thank you so much, Vandana, for such an insightful and inspiring discussion. So today's conversation made one thing very clear: supply chain leadership in digital transformation and in the AI era requires analytical depth, technological fluency, but a strong human-centered leadership, as Vandana has shown here very well with this empathy and this kind of lifelong learning mindset that she has. At MIT, as you know, our mission is to equip supply chain professionals with those analytical foundations, from modeling variability to predictive analytics through optimization, always trying to develop this critical thinking that I truly believe now is more required than ever in order to being able to understand what these powerful AI tools and technologies bring into us. So we need to have a good understanding and then make the connection with the business needs. So our supply chain analytics course is currently open for enrollment. If today's conversation resonated to you, this is a great moment also to continue strengthen your capabilities in supply chain analytics. Truly, we hope the discussion inspired you to continue investing in your learning journey. And with that, I would like to also thank my team, Elise, Jonica, Cara Grini, and Paulo de Sosa, for supporting the event behind the scenes and trying to be answering your questions through the Q&A. With that, thank you also to our global audience for joining us today. We truly value your feedback and are currently launching a poll to get your immediate feedback about what you think about this event. Please continue learning, be inspired by leaders like Vandana, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you.